My name is Victoria Ohaeri. I am the Executive Director of SpacesForChange.
Okay. So lately, there's a bill on the floor of the Senate, and it's called the NGO Regulatory Bill. And so far, it's been gaining a lot of attention. So, would like to know from you, what is this bill about?
Yeah, the NGO bill is a restrictive, very restrictive legislative proposal that is designed to enlarge governmental powers to interfere with the funding and operations of non-governmental organizations in Nigeria. So you are right to say it's been getting traction, in terms of conversations on the social media and within the civil society space. And the reason why there's a lot of uproar is because of the very controversial provisions of this bill. Maybe in the course of the conversation, we're going to look at different provisions, but some of them include very onerous registration terms, giving government very wide discretion to either register or refuse to register an organization or to decline registration in the national interest. And this bill has passed the second reading, and passing the second reading has been committed to the committee, to deliberate on it further and also to conduct a public hearing. So what is happening is very democratic, because that's what is supposed to happen. At the committee stage, you're supposed to receive a lot of comments from the public. You're supposed to conduct a public hearing to allow Nigerians to express themselves and make an input into the legislative process. So what is happening is actually very democratic, and it's a very good thing.
But from the conversation so far, it's as though the civil societies and NGO in particular have a thing to fear. Are they afraid of accountability?
The NGOs are not afraid of accountability. If the bill is about accountability, then it is a very positive development, of which NGOs, of course, should be very happy to identify with. But that is not the problem. The problem is the onerous burdens that it imposes on the operation of NGOs, the potential to shrink the civil space. And when we're talking about the civic space, it's not just the NGOs in the spaces in which NGOs are operating. The entire civic space in which even activists, even people like your media organization are operating, because it's targeted at just the entire civil society, which includes the media, which includes religious movements, which includes social movement, Rotary clubs, every organization that's involved in charitable operations. Is huge. It's very enormous. So it's not something that you wake up one morning, impose restrictions on the civic space without a challenge, without a conversation with the people that will be directly impacted by those legislative proposals.
Well, the federal government has come out to say that this bill will help curb terrorism and money laundering. That's not something you agree with?
Well, terrorism has been the currency of the moment, where every situation, every simple offense, every misdemeanor is now rebranded as terrorism. Even when you make certain comments expressing your view about the way our country is not run well, and when you express those frustrations, it's viewed as terrorism. We saw what happened in Kaduna, where religious worshippers blocked the convoy of a security chief. 347 people, and that's official count, were killed. There's nowhere in the world that kind of thing would happen without somebody being brought to justice. Is it the IPOB, where young people that there's no record of any violence, a single shot has not been fired, they have been labeled terrorists? Then the NGO bill, they've come again to say terrorism. Globally, there's this conversation regarding whether NGOs are being used as a conduit pipe for terrorism. That's a different conversation. If they're even saying NGOs can be used to finance terrorism, we can have a conversation around that. You can start saying, let's support this claim with evidence. How many NGOs in Nigeria? We need to be very, this terrorism is not child's play. It's not something you wake up and make an allegation. It's a very heavy terminology. You just throw that word around. If NGOs are involved in terrorist activity or financing terrorist activity, we need to call them out. It's not enough to make an assumption and then make a law around a flawed assumption. That's what that NGO bill represents. So the other thing is that there is nothing this bill is trying to do that the existing mechanisms are not already in place. You're talking about registration. Most NGOs in Nigeria are registered. Are you saying the body registering them is incompetent? Then tell them they're incompetent and scrap them. You don't let them remain there, then you set up a new agency. If it is terrorism, like I mentioned before, it's a global conversation about whether NGOs are, vehicles for financing terrorism. There is a body, they have had the Money Laundering Act, we have had the Terrorism Act, we've had the Terrorism Act amended even a number of times to accommodate some of these legitimate concerns. Then there's also a special control unit on money laundering that is set up specifically to regulate the activities of NGOs regarding money laundering and countering of financing of terrorism. So that body that has been set up, NGOs file returns, file their statements to that body. That body regulates not just NGOs, but all designated non-financial institutions, which NGOs are among. I think that body is not effective. There are some questions they are avoiding. You're just jumping a conversation and trying to reach your destination. It's not going to happen.
So you're saying that this bill is a response to the #opponents campaign?
Well, I have seen some people trying to draw the lines between the two. And people are saying that because they think that the National Assembly, there's been a lot of demand for them to open up their budgets, open up their financial operations too, so that people can actually see what's going on there. We see at the beginning of the year, I mean like when the budget is passed. I know our budget usually get passed like in June, July, but it should happen naturally at the beginning of the year. But whenever budgets pass, we see the billions allocated to the National Assembly. And Nigerians are asking questions. What are these billions for? What are we paying for? Because we don't see these billions thrown at other federal lawmakers in other parts of the world. So people are drawing connections between whether it is because of the pressure on the National Assembly to open up their own space. Maybe they are retaliating by also asking those who are making demands on them to also open up their own space. So whichever way you think it is, accountability is a goal, is our collective responsibility that all of us have a role to play.
A press release from the House of Reps signed by Honorable Umar Buba Jibril reads, and I quote, "The Nigerian Parliament is an institution governed by rules and regulation. When a bill is for public hearing, you go there and present your views like other interested Nigerians. Going on cheap propaganda and blackmail and even calling on world bodies, including the United Nations, to help you withdraw a bill from our National Assembly will not help you." Clearly, this is an accusation from the House of Reps. How do civil societies and NGOs respond to this?
Okay, Umar Jibril is a sponsor of the NGO bill. The NGO bill, I don't think people are calling in world bodies. There has been a trend in some parts of the country, but these are countries that are experiencing a different security situation. We're talking about countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Egypt, more recently Kenya, Somalia. Our security dynamics is not the same as in those countries. These are the kind of societies where restrictive laws have been introduced and adopted, as state law. When you try to use state power, force to crush dissent, to relabel every skirmish in the local context as terrorism, then the citizens will not fold your arms and allow you to have your way.
We want to know from you, do you think that NGOs and civil societies have had such tremendous impact in the Nigerian society?
There are so many communities in Nigeria that have almost little or no government presence, that the most basic, presence of development that they have was enabled by NGO interventions. There are so many of those communities. Imagine what could have happened in this country during the epidemic of Ebola or HIV and AIDS without NGO participation. Imagine the level of stigma that once existed in this country when there was a time HIV, for instance, was a death sentence. That mere knowledge of someone in this building having HIV, many people would not pass the street for several weeks. There was a time it happened in this country. There was a time when a body will be brought to the village and the person will lose weight. People will stigmatize you and isolate you from, the entire community, just for even the suspicion of having HIV. In Igbo, we used to call it Obirina Jocha. Obirina Jocha means you must end in the red earth. Imagine if we had no NGOs that went even within the hinterlands to reach out to people with information, to reach out to people with basic materials, with basic tools for them to understand the ramifications of that disease. What about what is happening in the Northeast, where monies meant for refugees grew wings and disappeared completely? There is still an investigation of a government official, a very high-ranking government official, that used government funds to cut grass. The amount of money spent on cutting grass could have sufficiently fed almost everybody in that refugee camp, or even educated all of them. But it was spent on cutting grass. There's a government report that, has been prevented from being made public. There are lots of things happening, out there that if without NGOs providing, filling that gap, imagine what the casualty figure would have been. There are so many things that even in organizations like SpacesForChange, we are involved in advocacy, communities that are displaced. Many communities that wouldn't have ever been able to afford legal services. NGOs are filling the gap, providing legal service to millions of Nigerian citizens. Maybe you should go to the courts, go to the matrimonial court, go to the criminal justice, to the criminal courts, go to the civil court, and see the number of people that are benefiting from services not provided by the government. Do you shut that down on the basis of mere assumptions? That is the question NGOs are asking.
Finally, ma'am, do you think, now that this whole scenario has happened, what do civil societies intend to do now that the bill is,
It's simple. This bill is an unnecessary distraction. It should be resisted. It should be blocked. Secondly, the conversations around accountability are very, very important. There are existing institutions that maintain oversight, on NGOs. We have the companies that are Corporate Affairs Commission that register NGOs. The Corporate Affairs Commission also requires NGOs to file annual returns. Many credible organizations file their annual returns. Maybe as a word of suggestion to the government, you could look at how many organizations are not filing their annual returns, because that is what the new commission is going to do. Maybe you could use that as a basis to filter some of those who are not complying with existing regulations. The other thing is to look at whether it's the money laundering, the anti-terrorism bodies you set up, strengthen existing institutions, strengthen democratic institutions, build their capacity, their investigative, their prosecutorial, and their adjudicative capacity, so that they can strengthen their regulation of the institutions that they are created to regulate. So but you don't just cure a defect by creating new bureaucracy. It's that bureaucracy that NGOs are trying to resist. And one last line, I will try to give an example or draw an analogy of what this restriction means. For instance, you live at Oshodi and your office is in Ikeja. It will take you a bus to get to your office, or stop at least at the bus stop and you can walk down to your office. Then you wake up one morning, the organization, your management decides that whoever that lives in Oshodi, before you come, you go to the head office in VI, report to the manager. And when you report to the manager, you also enter another cab, go to Apapa, report to the director. After that, then you now come to Ikeja. What will be your immediate response? You will be like, come on. I can always go to my office in Ikeja, just take one bus, get to Ikeja. Maybe call the director as soon as I'm in the office. I've arrived at the office. There are other simpler ways of doing this. Our business ease of doing business ranking is 170 out of 190 economies. So you don't make it better by imposing additional restrictions and needless restrictions to make doing business more difficult for people.
How difficult would this new law, if it comes to pass, make your work? How difficult?
That's just what I told you. You just like replicate when you finish your registration with CAC, you go to the new regulatory body, do another registration every 2 years. If you are doing research, some research studies, we are currently doing a research that has taken us 4 years because we are trying to understand how low-income women use energy. And it's taken us 4 years because every year, as prices increase, we keep monitoring the trends and continue to make our, document our findings. So it means that the first 2 years, you could get your registration, and the subsequent 2 years, the government, for some reason, in the national interest, refuses to renew your registration. What do? You go back to your consultant and say, okay, this is where it ends. Or you are handling litigation on behalf of a community. Litigation sometimes lasts 4, 5, 6, 7 years in court. The first 2 years, you have your registration. The second, third, fourth year, you don't have your registration. What do? You go back and say, I can no longer represent you, find another lawyer. So it's going to disrupt long-term planning. You can't even plan your project. You can't do anything. You can't even build strong institutions. It's not possible. Because for your ability to build a credible institution, a sustainable institution, means you should have certain certainties. There should be like investment certainty, which is not guaranteed under this law. So there is a heavy pressure also on NGOs to institutionalize their processes, to have directors, to have financial operations, to have administrative operations, so that it will be clear, the transparency, anybody can look in and see how that organization functions.